What's up, DS3 TV? We are back for another video. This one is History Hijinks, Rome's Crisis of the 3rd Century. This one is Albany Sarcastic Productions video, and yeah, let's get into it. And yeah, I don't really have too much to say before this one. Also, click the link in the description for my Twitch, because I'll be streaming a lot this week. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's all I have to say about that. And yeah, let's get into the video and play.
To come across a handful of points at which things seem to go very wrong. War here, plague there, civil war over here, another general marches his army on...
Yep, and then you got, you know, this famous painting of Caesar getting killed.
Rome, and after a certain point it doesn't even register. But these are all fairly momentary crises. A bad time, to be sure, but ultimately a self-contained catastrophe. Yet there is one truly abysmal chapter in Roman history that takes the cake. A quintuple-barrel calamity for the ages. And no, I'm not talking about the Byzantines because I am not looking to cry today.
That is the worst crisis of I mean, like how little it became, and like it stayed pretty, like, because the Byzantine Empire became so little, you know, it was only Constantinople, basically, that was left from the Byzantine Empire. Wow, yeah, I wouldn't be looking to cry today either about that.
I'm talking about the crisis of the 3rd century, which, by every reasonable prediction, should have destroyed everything. Fully everything. Yet, in a classic twist of Roman irony, the causes of this crisis and even a few of its symptoms would become the strategies used by Roman emperors to end the crisis and even keep Rome going for centuries to come. So, to figure out how the hell that's possible, let's do some history. The Roman Empire entered the 200s AD in an iffy state. The golden age of the last century was losing some of its shine thanks to a succession of truly garbage emperors, starting with Commodus the gladiator tyrant and not getting much better, like the guy who held a parade for his favorite rock and put his barber in charge of Rome's food supply. But beyond the scandalous hedonism...
Which is stupid. Why would you put your barber in charge of your food supply? I don't understand. And also, if you don't know this, I actually reacted to this before, but I'm doing a second reaction because when I restarted my computer for Valorant, because I really wanted to play Valorant on stream, that's literally all I've been like addicted to at this point, I lost the files for the other pre-recorded videos. So yeah, we're doing this again. And that's why you might hear me say again, or saying like, wow, like, yeah, I know it's the second time I said it or something like that. That's why. I know I probably said for the second time, but you know. It's fine. Just don't worry about it. Yeah, but we're gonna go back into the video.
Of these emperors lay far more dangerous habits, like how Alexander Severus bought the loyalty of larger and larger armies by ballooning their pay. To afford this, he debased the currency by mixing the gold and silver with plebby dork metals, which tanked their value. And far from actually protecting Rome, this dynamic just gave the army leverage. In the old Augustan days, legions served at the pleasure of the emperor, but now the emperor was just some guy who wore purple, and if Commodus could get strangled to death in a bath by his wrestling buddy, the bar for intimidating, puppeting, or just replacing an emperor was like 5 Praetorian guards. But then whomst to replace him with? Why, one of the generals, of course. And this was the same basic trick that Sulla and Caesar had pulled, but it saved the legwork of marching an army on Rome. Efficiency. So in the 50 years since the first guy got axed, over 20 such barracks emperors took their brief turn at the top. These guys weren't the most legitimate, since they conspicuously weren't the children or legal heirs of the previous emperor, but hey, you're the emperor! Never mind that another general 2 provinces over is taking notes on how you got to that point, you'll be fine! For a few months. All it took was some general beating up some Goths for their soldiers to say, "Great job, you should be the emperor," and then they get ideas and suddenly there's a mini civil war to sort out. And all this squabbling left the door wide open for Rome's rivals beyond the frontier to come right on in. Which frontier, you may ask? Good question. All of them. In the good old days, Germania was the primary ouch zone, but now the entire north was subject to incursions, from the Rhine all the way across the Danube, with fun new friends like Franks, Marcomanni, Goths, and plenty others. Some of these migrations were simply people looking for new lands to settle, while others were significantly more forceful. Terrifyingly, they also sailed down the Atlantic coast and into the eastern seas, striking as far as Athens in 267. The Roman army was good, but it wasn't that good. When an emperor...
it kind of seemed like it would have stretched the army so far.
Focused on one area, another was left wide open, but when the emperor tried to delegate, he might find his trusty generals scheming for that big promotion. Meanwhile, the eastern frontier was also a nightmare. The Parthians had been a sore spot for Rome since Moneybags Crassus was defeated and taxidermied with gold back in 53 BC, but Parthia rarely went on the offensive. They were just hard to conquer, so all of Rome's failed campaigns were essentially self-inflicted. However, the newly formed Sassanid Persian Empire, which took their place in the 220s, was far better organized and much more of an outward threat. In the 250s, King Shapur I pushed into Armenia, Roman Mesopotamia, and briefly into the Levant. The Sassanid menace would become a running theme for the next few centuries, but it came out of the gate real fast in the mid-200s. In 260, they captured Emperor Valerian in battle, whereafter the king used him as a footstool, as if being the emperor wasn't bad enough.
Wow, that sucks.
Already. But let's not limit our sample size. It was miserable to be any kind of Roman nowadays. We've got coins getting debased throughout the century to bribe the army, trade routes constantly disrupted by war, and entire regions being destroyed by invasions and counterattacks. Plus, a plague in the 250s killed thousands a day in Rome and whittled cities like Alexandria down to half, which in turn drastically reduced the labor force available to farm and
The Cyprian plague unsurprisingly coincides with the deepest period of turmoil in the country in the century, with the economy plummeting and basic food/goods being out of reach for most Romans. Hashtag get vaccinated, which you should do. You should always get vaccinated.
fight, resulting in widespread food and soldier shortages. As if the actual wars weren't enough of a problem, piracy within the empire was rampant, so cities and provinces spent what little resources they had on defensive walls
And also, I just thought about if somebody has to say the stupid thing of saying, "Oh yeah, but what if I'm allergic?" No, doctors actually can give it to you another way. Don't just say that. Please don't say that. That's stupid.
and small forts along major roads. All of this made clear that the society enjoyed during the Pax Romana was long gone, as it required the stability of strong government and a strong military, both of which were fully absent here in the 200s. Functions of government were carried out primarily by the army, who were only accountable to their very stabbable general. Luckily, when Rome worked, it worked, so if those political and military foundations could be patched up, at least on a local level, things could be alright. Now, believe it or not, the first 3 decades of the crisis were actually rather straightforward and even a bit tame compared to what went down after 260. Valerian being captured by Persia left Rome to his son and co-emperor Gallienus. Faced with the problem of everything everywhere all of the time, he was happy to delegate the Rhineland frontier to Postumus, a general and governor of Roman Germania. Naturally, it took all of 5 minutes for Postumus to be acclaimed as emperor, but not for all of Rome, just the western provinces. Gallienus couldn't really do anything about this, so Postumus had free reign to form a quasi-independent state in the west that stretched from Britannia through Gaul and Germania and down into Hispania. He created parallel Roman institutions like the Senate and consuls and had no intention of causing trouble with the rest of Rome. He just wanted his slice, and he was able to defend it fairly well. Meanwhile, a strikingly similar story plays out on the other end of the empire, where Prince Odenathus of Palmyra fought back against King Shapur and began acting independently of the new emperor Gallienus. Rome entrusted Odenathus with defense of the east and granted him governorship of the provinces of Cilicia and Syria down to Arabia. With only the eastern front to worry about, Odenathus held off the Sassanids until his assassination in 267, when his widow Zenobia became the de facto ruler of Palmyra and governor of all those provinces. Like in the west, this Palmyrene territory was essentially an independent.
Postumus was assassinated in 269 in Hispania and southern Gaul, jumped ship, leaving only half of the Gallic Empire left. Okay, so that makes sense. It worked though, because one person wasn't able to control all of that area.
State allied to Rome rather than provinces within it, and Rome was too occupied to really complain until 270, when Zenobia took advantage of a couple quick emperor deaths to annex Egypt and Galatia and proclaim her son as Imperator Caesar Augustus, which we can now fairly categorize as open revolt. Even then, the new emperor only cared that Egyptian grain exports stayed on schedule, and it's painfully telling that he could see part of his empire in a state of active rebellion and still think, I'll double back to that one later. I have more immediate problems. Plus, half of Egypt was in favor of their annexation. It seems weird, but you can see why. The Palmyrene Empire and the Gallic Empire were smaller, more nimble, more stable, and
Each sub-empire only had one frontier to manage, plus a smaller state made travel times quicker for both intelligence and armies. Which is true, because each sub-empire could have its own separate military, which, could defend a spot easier and quicker because they didn't have to like traverse over a whole entire country.
Slightly less susceptible to upstart barracks emperors. It just
Both Postumus and Odenathus were assassinated by their troops, but their states were resilient enough to continue on in their absence. Yes, I just had to finish that. But yeah, let's keep going.
felt good to know that the person in charge was only one province over rather than halfway across the sea and probably in the process of getting murdered by his own guards. Really, the actions of Postumus and Zenobia showed that they did work in the interest of Rome, just their corner of Rome, independently, and with the power of an emperor. Both states paid consistent homage to Rome, and despite how bad it looks on a map, were far less of a problem for the emperor than his own usurping generals, and even, arguably, a help, as they each removed an entire front from the emperor's to-do list. And this wildly set the stage for their later conquest, as the Emperor Aurelian was free to focus the first few years of his reign squarely on fighting rival usurpers and barbarians along the Danube, and, in Italy. In 271, he drove the Alemanni tribe out of the peninsula and built a new system of walls around Rome. He also organized a retreat from the always slightly untenable province of Dacia, making the much more defensible Danube River the consistent imperial border. With the northern front temporarily settled, he turned east, defeating Zenobia and reconquering the Palmyrene territories by the end of 273, and then the next year he schlepped west to reincorporate the Gallic state. To the empire's collective astonishment, Aurelian had reunified Rome under the singular authority of the emperor in just a few years, and was granted the title of Restitutor Orbis, no small praise. With the world restored, he turned his focus to reform of the state, but we're not out of the woods yet because Aurelian got murdered by his own troops. In the decade following, things were definitely better, but still kinda crap, with uncomfortably squishy emperors, a non-functioning economy, and more Frankish invasions in the 470s. But more people presented a new opportunity, and Rome essentially employed them in the reconstruction of devastated cities and farmland in exchange for letting them stay. This practice becomes quite a big deal in later centuries. So in the 250s and 60s, the empire spiraled out of control, and the 270s saw big progress, but the 280s and 90s are when Roman authority finally came back, during the reign and reforms of Diocletian. After his acclamation as emperor in 284, he issued more stable currency, firmly separated military and civil leadership to stop the army muscling in on the state, and moved the seat of government north to Mediolanum, where he could better oversee the front. Further, he delegated regional authority to his most capable officers and made his general Maximian co-emperor in 286. Two emperors wasn't a new idea, but by placing Maximian in charge of the west and Diocletian taking the east, this arrangement looked awfully similar to the business with Gaul and Palmyra, except this time it was intentional and formalized by intermarrying the families, which also created a line of legitimate succession. In 293, he expanded this setup by adding two junior co-emperors known as Caesars to support the two senior Augusti.
Which actually, it makes it a simpler, I want to say, a simpler empire to defend, because now you're only, like, you know how he said before, you're only defending one province. Blue was definitely right about that. Like, you're only defending one province. You don't have to defend any, like, you don't have to defend a whole entire country every single time someone comes to attack you from one side of the empire to another.
Tetrarchy kept Diocletian firmly at the top, but each emperor had regional autonomy. By recognizing that Rome tended to split along geographic fault lines, Diocletian's diet federalism turned a perennial problem into a stabilizing strength. He also snuffed the threat of civil wars by cutting all the provinces in half, so each of the 100 governors had a clearer responsibility and less power to stand up against his local tetrarch. He also grouped these new small provinces into 12 regional dioceses to really layer the strata onto government. So in an insanely trolly twist of fate, the Gallic and Palmyrene breakaway empires were a trial run of what Diocletian would make official policy. Rome was too fragile for one emperor, so take it in parts. It was no Pax Romana, and even the Tetrarchy would be temporary, but it was enough. Diocletian's reforms made a difference where they counted and brought Rome out of the crisis on a much more stable footing than they ever could have hoped for 2 decades earlier. I think people get excited about Rome for the wrong reasons. Rome conquered this, they conquered that. Those are all whatever. What's impressive are the moments when Rome stares into the pale face of death and tells him to wait his goddamn turn. Because no civilization could veto their own demise quite like Rome, and there's no greater refusal than the crisis of the 3rd century. To suffer 5 chaotic decades but then learn from chaos itself to adapt the empire and come out on top. Rome would die, but not yet. Thank you for watching.
That was a really good video. So yeah, we'll look at some more only sarcastic videos later this week, and yeah, it's gonna be a fun rest of the week. And yeah, talk to you guys. Oh yeah, also subscribe to the channel when we get 1,000 subscribers by my birthday, September 13th. Also, link in the description for my Twitch. You just gotta click that little arrow, that down arrow, and you can see the link and just click on that. And yeah, I'll be streaming. I'll be streaming a lot this week. And also, yeah, talk to you guys in the next video. And peace.